What is going on today, everybody? It's Buddy here, and in this video I'm going to show you guys how I took this non-running, neglected, and moldy Jeep and turned it into thousands of dollars of profit. And if you're new to the channel, my name is Buddy, and I actually flip cars for a living full-time and make videos on the entire process I use while doing it. So if you want to learn how to get potentially profitable vehicles at low prices, how to fix them up, and flip them and make a whole lot of money on the back end, be sure to subscribe now so you don't miss anything. I'm about to go over the entire process I use from buying and selling a car, from how much I knew I should buy it for, how much I knew I could sell it for, how much money I had to put into it, and ultimately how much money I made. So without further ado, let's jump right into the video. So for you guys who've seen my other flip videos, you'll know that I usually find the best deals here on Facebook Marketplace. It just seems to be eating up all the other for sale apps like OfferUp and Craigslist. It used to be a pretty even spread of cars posted between all the other apps, but now Facebook seems to have more cars than all of the other apps combined. So it comes to no surprise when I was scrolling on Facebook Marketplace and I came across this Jeep. The $1,500 price tag really caught my attention. A 2007 Jeep Commander for $1,500, and it only had 132,000 miles. 132,000 miles for a 2007 is pretty low, especially for only $1,500. I figured that there's gotta be something wrong with it. So I clicked on the ad to check out the description. The description stated, "Not running. Went to start one day and it never started. Before that, ran fine." Now, one thing you guys need to know about descriptions is that the seller 9 times out of 10 is full of They will lie and tell you it needs a battery or something and it's good to go, when in reality the engine might be shot. They just want someone to give them a little bit of money and take it off their driveway. So you always got to be very cautious of that. And a prime example of a seller lying about the condition of a car is the Highlander from my last flipping video. Sellers will pull some shady stuff. So when this seller said ran good before it stopped running, I'm going to take that with a grain of salt. So the reason this car doesn't start could be something as simple as a $5 relay to a timing chain to a completely blown unrepairable engine. Really, the possibilities are endless. Now the next thing in the description is that the tires are bald. So you can figure right away without even looking at the car it's going to need 4 tires. Now you can drive around and search all day and look for used tires and save some money, but a nicer vehicle like this, I'd say going with 4 new inexpensive tires would probably be the move. So I'm going to add an additional $500 minimum because that's how much it's going to cost for 4 tires mounted and balanced. So the next thing in the description is that the car needs some TLC. And I've been doing this long enough to know that TLC is short for the car's been sitting and I've been neglecting taking care of it for quite some time. So that's definitely something to consider. And lastly, don't have time to mess with it, $1,500. Now, what I usually find when someone says they don't have time to mess with it is that they're not very mechanically inclined. When someone is selling a car that needs work and also works on cars, you're going to get a description showing something like this, listing what it needs or what has been recently replaced on it. So factoring that in, you might be able to get a vehicle that's not running started with minimal effort. Now after reading the description, I checked out the pictures and it seemed to be in pretty good shape. I didn't see any fading of the paint or any major body damage. These terrible angles made it hard for me to see the whole car, but it looks to be in pretty decent shape from what I can see. The only thing I noticed was 2 holes in the front bumper where a front license plate was probably mounted, but nothing major. Again, from the terrible photography angles, I couldn't see the whole interior, but I did notice that the seat needed some upholstery work. It didn't seem too bad in the interior. The only way to really tell is to go see it. Now before I messaged the seller, I was curious to see what something like this sells for, so I jumped on kellybluebook.com to see what the book value was. Now, I know Kelley Blue Book is not the end all be all for getting car prices, but it is a good place to start. And it seems like this thing sells for a private party sale around $5,000 in good condition. Now how I usually determine how much I'm going to actually buy a car for is this trade-in tab right here. This is roughly what a dealer is going to buy a car at a wholesale price, which is about $2,500 for this vehicle. Now, this is $25 wholesale for a car that runs in good condition. Remember, this thing doesn't run, so it's for sale for around $1,500. As long as I can get it started relatively cheap, I knew there was a good bit of money to be made. So I decided to take it to the next step, and I shot the seller a message asking if it's still available. They did reply yes, and if you watched my car flipping videos before, you'll see that I always ask, do you have any wiggle room on the price? I never just blurt out a number saying, will you take $1,000, will you take $500? Honestly, people hate when you do that. All negotiation with money should be done in person, so asking if they have any wiggle room on the price is a great way to see if the seller is negotiable on the price without sounding like a lowballer. Now, sometimes you might find a vehicle an hour or more away that you really see some potential in. So for example, in episode 2 of the series, I found this BMW on a Facebook group almost 3 hours away for a killer deal. In situations like that, I would say go ahead and see if you guys can work out a price over text. It's an absolute gamble to see a car that far away though, because it could turn out to be a complete waste of time and a complete piece of junk of a car. So check out episode 2 as I go over more tips for negotiating a vehicle that's far away. But if someone lives a reasonable driving distance from you, then be sure to leave the negotiation in person when you guys meet. You'll have a lot more leverage for the seller to accept a lowball offer and not just get ignored over text. Now after I asked if they had any wiggle room, they responded with a little bit of room but not much. So I didn't waste any time asking any more questions about the Jeep since I already assumed that they aren't mechanically inclined from the description that they posted. So we found the time that worked for the both of us and I set off to see the Jeep in person. Now, while we're on the way to go see the car, I do want to mention a few must-haves when you go to inspect the car. First, the most important thing is an OBD reader. I've actually never looked at a car without one. I will have a link to 3 OBD readers that I've personally used and recommend in the description below. They're at 3 price points. One's a cheaper one, one's a mid-grade, and one's a little bit of a higher grade scanner. I also have a video going over the difference between cheaper and more expensive scanners, so you guys can be educated buyers, and I'll leave a link for that video in the description below. Also, I did bring my jump starters. Considering the car doesn't run and has been sitting for a while, I'm almost positive the battery is going to be dead, so a jump starter is going to be needed to see why the thing doesn't start. I also have a video on jump starters and which ones I recommend after trying different ones, and I'll leave a link for that video in the description as well. Now, another thing you'll absolutely need is a wad of cash. As the saying goes, cash is king, and I can't stress this enough. If you're going to try and buy a car for under what the seller is asking, then you're going to need to buy it with cash. If you show up with a cashier's check or your checkbook or offer to pay them via Cash App or Zelle or something like that, you're much more likely to get turned down. Now, someone may be willing to take $1,000 cash for their car, for example, but not be willing to take $1,000 written on a cashier's check. There's something called friction in sales psychology. In simple terms, friction just means any little inconvenience, like having the seller have to go to the bank to cash your check and wait for it to clear, just might be enough to blow the entire deal. So take my word for this. Bring cash. Obviously, always be safe carrying the cash with you and be sure to meet in a safe location, but definitely bring cash. Now, obviously, it is super important to know how to inspect the used car before you buy it. And lucky for you guys, I've made a complete video series on how to inspect a used car before you actually purchase it. These videos are super detailed and go over everything you need to know to give you the best chances to not get ripped off. Even if you're not looking to flip cars, knowing how to inspect a used car before you buy it can save you hundreds or even thousands of dollars in the long run. I personally inspected probably over 1,000 cars in the last 10 years, so I definitely know all the little tips and tricks you'll want to know before you drop a big wad of cash when you're in the market for a car. So after 20 minutes of driving, we finally arrived at the seller's house where the Jeep is at. At first glance, I was actually pretty impressed in the condition of the paint. It was pretty hard to see any details from the bad photography in the advertisement, but the paint looked really great, so that is a good start. Now, the black exterior trim was a different story. It did show a good bit of fading, and also looking up at the roof rack, there was some fading as well, but nothing I couldn't fix. I was honestly really surprised how good the paint looked considering how faded the trim and roof rack were. The seller was also definitely not lying about the tires being bald. They were some oversized aftermarket rugged looking tires, and it looks like the thing hasn't gotten alignment in probably 10 years because these front tires were very unevenly worn. You can see looking at the back tires, they were pretty evenly worn. Not much life left, but they were evenly worn. So I immediately knew the seller neglected getting an alignment for a really long time, and that's concerning because usually when someone doesn't get an alignment, they neglect other parts of maintenance on the car, so that's definitely something to keep in mind. I also checked the oil to see if the seller neglected changing the oil as well, but to my surprise, it didn't seem too bad, so that's a little bit of a relief here. I also noticed this thing was definitely lifted. That's usually not a big deal if done properly, but a lot of lifted vehicles that I've came across over the years have been jerry-rigged, so you gotta watch out for that when you see an older lifted vehicle. The suspension seemed good. The only thing I could find wrong with the suspension is that one ball joint was shot, which wouldn't make it necessarily dangerous to drive, but it needed to be swapped out. Now, taking a peek at the interior, everything seemed to be in decent shape, besides it being dirty and dusty. There was no busted AC vents, no broken parts on the dash. I did notice that the passenger door handle was busted in. No idea how that would have happened, but it was really the only thing that I noticed broken in the interior. Now, the driver's seat did have some nice rips in there, and the leather was pretty worn down, but that's really nothing I couldn't handle for fairly inexpensive. Now, taking a look in the back, I did see some white mold growing on the passenger seats. Now, living here in Florida, it's extremely humid almost all year long, and when moist air sits in a car for a while, white mold will start to grow. That's not too big of a deal, and I'll show you guys how I'm going to handle that later. So cosmetically, it didn't seem like a lost cause. Being that the paint was decent and the interior was in okay shape, I knew that with a little bit of effort and not a whole lot of money, I could make this thing look really clean again. But now, the most important part, to see if I can get this thing started or see why it's not starting in the first place. I hooked my jump starters up to the battery since the battery was completely dead just like I expected. I put the key in the ignition and all it did was crank. So when it cranks like that, the first thing I'm thinking is that it's not getting fuel. When you turn the key and the engine turns over, you know the starter is good because it's getting voltage from the battery and it's spinning the engine. So my guess is the fuel pump on the back side of the vehicle is not pumping gas, or there's a blockage here in the fuel line, or the fuel filter's clogged and it's blocking any gas from getting into the engine. So a way to test if the fuel pump is bad is you can turn the key one click before it actually cranks. Now you got to listen very closely. There's usually a slight hum coming from the back of the vehicle when the fuel pump is working. That hum is the actual fuel pump engaging and it's pumping fuel towards the engine. So when I tested this, I heard absolutely no hum. So that verified my assumption that the fuel pump went out. Well, so I thought. I noticed a tiny little red light flashing on the dash, and that's usually a sign of anti-theft that's been activated. And what anti-theft systems can do sometimes is shut down the fuel pump so the engine can't get any gas, so your car won't get stolen if someone tries to use a fake key. And the key that the seller gave me to start the Jeep was not a factory key. It was some cheap little key with probably a cheap transponder. Now what a transponder and a key does is it sends a signal to something called the skim module in the vehicle that lets the car's computer know that this is the right key and it can start up. So I asked the seller how old this key was, and he said it worked for him for a few months after he lost the factory key. So it's quite the coincidence, I'm thinking, that this thing just stopped working shortly after this new key. So at this point, I wanted to see what's not working exactly. So I hooked up my OBD reader to the car and I deleted the key from the system and then reprogrammed it. I was hoping this would make it start now, but unfortunately, it's still cranked and cranked, but no start. So I know the skim module is working because it is picking up the key and letting me reprogram it. The transponder and the key is not shorted because my scanner picked it up as well. It's just the skim doesn't seem to like this key anymore. So my only option if I want to get this thing running is go to the dealership and get a factory key. Now I'm not absolutely certain this is going to make it start, but I'm about 90% confident that it will. But before I go spend any money on this thing, I want to make a deal with the seller. I'm not about to go through all this effort diagnosing and fixing his Jeep just for him to change the price on me after I get it running. So before I leave, I go up to the seller and I tell him this. So I got a pretty good idea of how I can get it running, but I'm not 100%. If the price is right, I like to buy it as is right now, not running. I'll come back tomorrow and try something to get it started and take it away from you. But if I can't get it started, I'll have a tow truck come take it by tomorrow night. Now, I know you're asking $1,500, but since it's not running, I really have no way of knowing all what's wrong with it. I can't even test drive it. So I think $1,000 is more than fair because this is me taking a gamble. Now, I wasn't too surprised when he countered my offer. As you remember, he did say some room, but not much. I knew he was going to be a little tough, but he countered me at $1,400, which is not where I really wanted to be. I knew if I could get this thing started and cleaned up, I could sell it for about $5,000 because that's what the Kelly Blue Book value was listed at. And that's a pretty nice profit margin. Now, I could tell from his voice he was pretty firm on this $1,400. So I just made one last ditch attempt to see if I can get another $100 off. I pulled out a stack of $100 bills and counted $1,300 and said, let's meet in the middle. And he shook my hand for a $1,300 deal. Not exactly where I wanted to be, but also not too bad. So I told the seller I'm going to go get a new key from the dealership and see if I can program it in and get this thing to start, and I'll be back the next day. So I took a picture of the VIN number and headed to the local Dodge Jeep Ram dealership. So I went to the parts store of the dealership and showed them the VIN number and told them that I need a key. They said they can't program it for me, but what they can do is give me a corresponding key with the VIN. I said that's no problem because lucky for me, I have a nice fancy scanner that programs keys. And if you guys are curious what my main scanner that I use on a daily basis is, I'll leave a link for that in the description as well. So I bought a key for $175 and headed back to the seller's house the next morning. So I popped the hood, I hooked up my jumper cables back to the battery, I programmed the new key that I got from the dealership, I crossed my fingers and I turned the key and it got her started right up. Yeah. I was super excited I didn't have to call a tow truck because that would mean I would have to be out $175 for the key and another $125 for the tow. So this was a big relief here. So now that we got her running, I took it for a little test drive around the neighborhood to make sure it was safe to drive and make sure to actually make it home. Now it was making some loud suspension noise when I drove over little bumps, but it was nothing that I thought was dangerous. The engine sounded good and the AC blew ice cold, which was a huge relief since it was about 95 degrees here in Florida. I knew the tires were way oversized because when I tried to take a tight turn, it rubbed against the wheel well, but I knew smaller tires would fix that issue. So my girlfriend took my car home and I drove the brand new Jeep back home. Now on the way home, I could tell one thing it definitely needed was an alignment desperately. As soon as I let go of the wheel, it pulled me off the road within a few seconds. It was also super loud as these bald tires made some serious road noise. I stopped by a gas station on the way home and put $20 in the tank. Even though it already had a quarter tank, it's always a good idea to throw some fresh gas in there. The seller claimed it only sat there for about a week, but remember what I said about sellers being full of yeah, so definitely don't believe anything that they're going to tell you. So luckily the Jeep made it home in one piece with no hiccups on the ride home. So now it's time to get this fixed up and get it running strong again. But first, let's start our money invested chart to start tracking how much money we're going to have to put into this thing before we get it all fixed up. So we have $1,300 for the price of the Jeep. We have another $175 for the key that we got from the dealership and $20 worth of gas that I put in the gas tank. That brings us up to a total of $1,495, and we got a running Jeep worth about $5,000 cleaned up. So let's start that cleanup process. Now I put together a to-do list for everything that this Jeep needs, so it's a pretty long list. Let's not waste any time and start fixing it up. The very first thing I want to do was get some new tires on her. Now, as I said before, I didn't want to get 4 mix match tires from used tire shops. Maybe this thing was like a $2,000 beater. I could see doing that, but I'm going to try and sell this thing for over $5,000. So I went over to Tires Plus and threw 4 brand new mid-grade tires on it. I also went back to OEM size tires since the oversized ones rubbed on the wheel well, and that's definitely not something I want when I'm selling it. Tires Plus also had to give the Jeep a much needed alignment. With a little bit of negotiating at the tire shop, I was able to get 4 new tires mounted and balanced with an alignment for only $490. Not too bad at all. Now we can cross tires and alignment off of our list and move on to the next thing on our to-do list, and that was to address that suspension noise. Now remember, as I stated earlier when inspecting the Jeep at the seller's house, that I noticed that the ball joint was pretty much shot out. So I'm pretty sure this is the reason for the Jeep making those loud clunks when hitting little bumps in the road. So replacing ball joints is not that big of a deal, and a fairly inexperienced person can do it with the right tools. So this rubber here that is split holds in the grease, and once the rubber splits, dirt can get in there and it ruins the ball joint. It rubs against the metal and it kind of wears it down. You can rent a ball joint press like you see here from a place like AutoZone or Advanced Auto Parts. Now they're not bolted in, they're just pressed in with a lot of pressure, and some actually have a snap ring that holds them in as well. Now that I got the old one out, I removed the rubber boot all the way so you guys can see that there is some play here in the joint. The ball part of the joint, that's the reason they're called ball joints of course, should be nice and snug. This shouldn't be playing around like this, and that can cause those metal clunks when driving. Now, to my unpleasant surprise, the test drive after showed that the clunk did not go away completely when going over small bumps. It was a big improvement, but there was still some suspension noise. So a little trick you can do is you can rock your vehicle back and forth as hard as you can and have someone listen to see what's making noise or watch for any play in the suspension. Lucky for me, this thing has a bit of room that you can peek behind the tire, and I saw the control arm bushing was very loose. It looks like a new upper control arm was installed recently, and the bozo who installed it did not properly secure the arm. So I got the arm tightened down and took it for another test drive, and lucky for me, the suspension noise was completely gone. So let's cross suspension noise off of our to-do list and move on to the brakes. Now I didn't notice any brake noise until I actually test drove the Jeep again to see if the suspension noise went away, and when driving you can hear a constant on and off rubbing like this. Now, that noise 9 out of 10 times is your brakes. It's either uneven brake pad wear from an ungreased guide pin or your rotors are warped. So upon taking off the brake calipers, I noticed some of the guide pins were completely seized. I had to beat them off with a hammer and a chisel. These guide pins should move freely so that the pads can squeeze the brake disc evenly. So the guide pins definitely needed to be removed, cleaned up, and re-greased. The seized guide pins cause uneven wear on the brake pads, so this thing needed all new pads. The rotors also look pretty old, so I figured I might as well do a complete brake job while I'm down here. So I hit up my friends at buybrakes.com for some pads and rotors. The awesome thing about this company is that they'll price match their competitors, so you know you're getting the absolute best deal out there. They also have a free concierge service, so if you're a beginner and you need help just replacing the brakes on your day-to-day car, or you're looking to build a race car or a track car and you need some high performance brakes, they'll go over everything you need. So a huge shout out to buybrakes.com for sending me out these EBC brake rotors and pads. Now once I got the guide pins all cleaned up and greased properly, you can see they move nice and free now. So all that's left is to put everything back together, and once I got the brakes back together, the brake noise was completely gone. So let's go ahead and cross brake noise off the list and move on to the oil. Now remember how I checked the oil at the seller's house and it seemed to be old but definitely not nasty and super neglected? Well, it's recommended to change the oil every 3 to 10,000 miles, just depending on the manufacturer recommendation, or every 3 to 12 months. And I know the seller probably lied to me saying the thing has only been sitting for a few weeks, but in a few weeks, mold's not going to grow on the back seat. So yeah. Now, even though this oil looks like it has some life left, I have no clue how old it is. So I went to Walmart and grabbed some oil and a new oil filter, dropped the old oil out, pulled out the old oil filter, screwed in the new oil filter, and poured in some fresh oil. Walmart has some really good oil prices, so for the synthetic blend and the oil filter, I only spent about $22. So before we move on, let's update our money invested chart real quick. We have $490 for the new tires and alignment, $22 for our ball joint. Now, even though buybrakes.com did send me out those EBC brake pads and rotors, I'll still add the price of them to the list, so that's $350. And then we got another $22 for the oil and oil filter, and now that brings us to a total of $2,379. So let's keep on moving. And now we got this thing running butter smooth across the road, and that is all the mechanical issues that are wrong with it. So now it's time to get this thing looking nice again. So let's start with the interior. I started by taking the floor mats off, and to my pleasant surprise, under the floor mat on the driver's side had some really bad white mold growing. So before anything, I grabbed some carpet shampoo and got to work on this carpet. And I sucked all the mold and dirt up with my shop vac, and I had to do this a few times to make sure I really got it all out. Now, a trick for white mold coincidentally is white vinegar. I put it in a spray bottle and I sprayed it down real good to kill the mold so it won't grow back. And I did check this hole in the carpet to make sure it wasn't going all the way through the floorboard and water was splashing up causing the mold, but it seemed to just be a random hole. So after I was done with that, I got my trusty helper to come help detail the interior of the Jeep. And don't worry guys, I bought her some dinner afterwards, so she was totally happy. Now, while she was wiping everything down, I sprayed the back seats with white vinegar since the back seats also had the white mold growing. I probably should have waited until my girlfriend was done because she was not happy about the smell.
Huh?
It smells like
What's it smell like?
It smells like vinegar.
You don't like the smell of vinegar?
Not a car.
Now, since a lot of people ask me in the comment section what I use for detailing products, I'm actually happy to announce that I partnered up with Lithium Auto Care so I can get you guys discount codes on all of their products. Right now, we're using Inner Space Interior Detail Spray on the Jeep, and I really have to say this stuff is awesome. Not only does it protect your interior so it doesn't wear out faster, but it makes it look like brand new factory interior again. I'm really happy that I reached out to Lithium Auto Care since I've been actually using their products well before I even started YouTube. And for anybody watching this video, you can get 20% off your entire order on their website by using code word BuddiesDIY20 at checkout. I'll leave all the information for all that in the description. So let's cross off detailing the interior off the list and move on to getting this seat fixed. Now, removing the seat is pretty straightforward. On all cars, there's 4 bolts on each corner of the seat that you need to unbolt and unhook the wiring under the seat, and you'll be able to pop it right out. Once I got the seat out, I dropped it off at my local upholstery shop that I usually go to. Unfortunately, they told me they didn't have a perfect match to the leather and they can order it, but I told them I didn't want to wait, so just throw on the closest color you guys got. And the color actually looks a lot closer in person than it did in this video, but I have a way of fixing this dilemma anyways, and that is with some seat dye from my friends over at seatdoctors.com. So what they do is they take your VIN number and they give you an exact color match as the factory color. So I cleaned down the seat with a sponge and I dyed the entire seat. You can even see here on the cracks in the leather that were completely gone after the seat dye. It really makes even an old worn down seat look absolutely perfect when you're done. So now all the leather matched perfectly and the wear was completely gone. So big thanks to my friends over there at seatdoctors.com for the seat dye. So going back to the money invested chart, it cost me another $120 to get the panels replaced on the driver's seat, so we'll tack that on to the total. And now we can cross off repairing the driver's seat on our to-do list, and the last thing we have to do in the interior is that busted door handle. I was able to find one on eBay for about 33 bucks with all the screws and parts and attachments for it. So here there's 3 screws holding on the door panel that I had to remove, and after that I was able to work my hand under the panel and just pop it off. The company that supplied the door handle even threw in a little drill bit attachment that you can see here that I'm drilling off the old rivets of the door handle. After that, it was as simple as just screwing on the new handle, throwing the door panel back on the door, and screwing it back down in place. It's all fixed now and working good, so that's another $33 we're going to tack on to our money invested chart. So let's cross off the door handle off the list, and there's one more thing I really want to do to give this interior a nice final touch. And for only $37, I was able to find these really nice Jeep branded rubber mats for the floorboard and a branded steering wheel cover since the steering wheel had a little bit of wear on it. My advice is don't get cheap junk if you decide to do this step, but these 2 little accessories are a nice finishing touch to the interior. And now that the interior is officially done and looking absolutely beautiful, let's go ahead and tack another $37 for the steering wheel cover and the floor mats to the money invested chart. So now we got the Jeep running great, we got the interior looking awesome. All we need to do now is just work on the exterior. First, I'm going to start with taking these girly little stickers off. I believe the seller's daughter drove this Jeep, and a quick tip to fully removing the sticker is to wipe away any excess glue with a little bit of goof off. Now, some of you may have noticed the sticker glue that was dried up on the front bumper of the Jeep when looking at the ad original pictures. This is what happens when you take a sticker off and you don't wipe away the excess adhesive. The sun will just bake it on and it'll be really hard to take it off in the future. But the same process applies to removing this adhesive. Just some goof off in a rag and just wipe away. Just be sure to not rub all the clear coat off when you're doing this. So now that we got the stickers and the dried adhesive off the front bumper, it's time to refinish the trim. Now, lucky for you guys, I have a detailed video on how I refinish trim on all the vehicles that I have and flip. Simply put, you'll just need to mask off the area with some tape to catch any overspray. You'll also need to lightly stand and prime the area you want to refinish, and then blast it down with some trim and bumper paint by Rust-Oleum. I've used a lot of product over the years, and I found that this is the best method to refinish trim, bar none. Other methods don't last as long, and they can give you kind of an ugly finish. This one will literally make it look like it just came off the factory line. As you guys can see here, there's a huge difference from the before and after. It was actually really easy to remove the roof rack, just a couple of screws. I laid it on some plastic tarp, and I sprayed it all down. It came out beautiful if I don't say so myself. And I also did the door handles on this. So check out my video on restoring trim if you want to learn exactly how I do it to make sure you get the longest lasting, beautiful looking finish. So we use 3 cans of primer and we use 3 cans of trim and bumper paint. So let's go ahead and add on another $30 to the money invested chart since each can was roughly $5. Now we can cross off refinishing the trim on our to-do list and move on to getting this thing cleaned up. So I took the Jeep to my local self-service car wash, and for only $4 I was able to give this thing a quick wash and got all the heavy dirt and oil handprints from me working on it off. These things don't get it super detailed, but it's just enough for what I need. After it's all dried off and back at the house, I took my waterless wash by Lithium and gave it a real deep, thorough detail, getting all the stubborn dirt and scuffs out. And this is the first time I'm using this waterless wash by Lithium, and I can say I am thoroughly impressed. It leaves your paint with that real squeaky feeling when you rub your finger across it when it's done. This paint held up awesome for being almost 15 years in the Florida heat, and I'm really happy with how this thing looks after a wash. And to really finish off the exterior detail of the Jeep, we're going to slap on some tire conditioner from Lithium as well, and this stuff lasts a really long time. I've used this before. It doesn't give the tires a super shiny gaudy look, and it kind of gives it like that dull shine look, and it really is going to add a nice touch to the exterior. So let's tack on another $4 to our money invested chart for using the self-service car wash and move on to the finishing touches. Now it's time to do my favorite part and restore the headlights. I do this with every car I flip and also every car I own. I got a really good method I use to restore the headlights, and it only takes about 10 minutes and it's guaranteed to give them the best clarity. I'll be sure to leave a video as I made a full-length detailed video in the description for you guys if you want to learn how to restore your headlights like I do it. And after the restore, we're going to want to make sure they stay looking clear for a long time, so I'm going to throw some Lithium ceramic coating on them. They make a super durable ceramic coating that blocks off UV rays, and it keeps the headlights from turning foggy again. And don't forget, 20% off all Lithium products for you guys when you use promo code BuddiesDIY20. And we'll go ahead and we'll cross off restoring our headlights off the to-do list, and we're going to move on to our last thing. Now remember the 2 holes in the front bumper where the front license plate was probably mounted before? Now, I didn't want to go through the trouble of patching those holes up and repainting them and all that mess, especially since a lot of cars in the past that I've sold are out-of-state people looking for a car in Florida. People love to come to Florida on vacation, and when they're down here, sometimes they'll buy a car because they know Florida cars never had rust on them like those northerner cars. And if someone bought it from out of state like New Jersey or New York, they are required to have front license plates. So they're just going to re-drill the holes that I fixed, so I might as well just throw a front license plate bracket on there. And I got one here at the store for only $6, and I found a really cool black Jeep license plate to mount on the front for only $15. It was much easier than doing the body work, and it actually looks pretty cool here with that front license plate. So last but not least, let's add another $21 to the money invested chart, and we can cross off the last thing on our to-do list. So now we're all fixed up with the suspension issues. The interior looking super clean, the exterior looking super sexy. This thing is finally ready to sell. But first, let's go over together the money invested chart and see how much we have invested in this thing total. So we got $1,300 for the Jeep, $175 for the key from the dealership, $20 in gas for the Jeep, $490 for the tires and the alignment, $22 for that ball joint we replaced, $350 for those EBC brand brake parts, $22 for the oil and oil filter, $120 for the upholstery work, $33 for the door handle replacement, $37 for the steering wheel cover and floor mats, $30 for the trim paint and primer, $4 for the self-service car wash, and $21 for the front license plate and mount. And that's going to bring us to a grand total of $2,624 invested in this thing. So all we got to do now is get this thing online and find it a new home. And if you've seen my other car flipping videos, I always recommend that you do take pictures in portrait mode and not in landscape mode. Reason being is that most people now, when they shop for a car, they just do it on an app on their phone. And if you see here in this screenshot, the difference between what a picture looks like in portrait mode versus landscape mode on a phone. So be sure to keep that phone vertical when you're taking the pictures. So we got some really sharp pictures of the interior and exterior and posted it on Facebook Marketplace for $6,750. How remember the Kelly Blue Book value was about $5,000 for the average. Well, as many of you know, especially if you live in America lately, inflation is going crazy. Used car market is really skyrocketing, so I just did some comparisons and looked on Facebook Marketplace to see what some comps are, and you can see a lot of people are selling this exact Jeep Commander between $500 and $7,500. Not to mention mine has way less miles than all these, brand new tires, brand new brake pads and rotors, and is in super clean shape. So I think $6,750 is a very fair deal considering the other options I'm seeing here for sale. I also wanted to mention when I did look up the VIN for this vehicle, it came out to a 2006 and not a 2007. So always do your own VIN checkup, and I talk a lot more about this on my How to Inspect a Used Car Before You Buy It video series. So for more information on that side of things, be sure to check out those videos. Now in terms of the description, you want to make sure you include all good things about the vehicle you're selling. Things like brand new tires, brand new brake pads and rotors, fresh oil change, brand new oil filter, AC blows ice cold. And you always want to include all positive things in the description, and we want to make this Jeep sound as attractive as the pictures that we posted. So within a few days, I got the classic lowball offer and responded with, "Bring money and we'll talk." He came by and he test drove the Jeep, and I could tell he really liked the Jeep, which was a bad mistake on his part because when someone gets excited about a car, you know they're going to pay more than a lowball. Rule number one is never show excitement when buying a car. So we did end up meeting in the middle and made a deal at $6,000 for a super successful flip. So now that it's sold, let's do a little bit of math together. We had $2,624 invested in this thing total, and with a sale price of $6,000, that is $3,376 profit. Now in my book, that is a super successful flip. The best so far here on this video series, actually. So now let's calculate how many hours this took and break that down into an hourly rate, since I know a lot of you guys ask about that. So driving to the shop for some new tires and alignment was only about 45 minutes out of my time, since the shop is pretty close. The ball joint took roughly about 45 minutes, since ball joints are fairly easy. A full brake job on this thing took about 2 hours. An oil change only took me about 15 minutes. The interior detail did take a little bit, especially since I had to shampoo that carpet, so I'd say a good 2.5 hours on that. Restoring the driver's seat was only about 30 minutes since the upholstery shop is very close. The door handle was fairly easy at maybe 30 minutes. Removing the stickers and dry adhesive took about 15 minutes. Restoring the trim took about 3 hours since I had to mask off everything and I had to do the roof rack as well, so that took a little bit. Detailing the exterior took a good hour and a half to make it look real pretty, and the headlight restoration only took about 30 minutes since my method is pretty quick. Now obviously we have to add picking up the car, getting the key from the dealership, driving back and grabbing the car again, and all that extra stuff. So let's add another 6 hours of the time I probably spent driving around trying to get this thing ready to sell. So that's 18.5 hours totally invested. Let's just round that up to 19 hours. So now we got $3,367 divided by 19 hours invested in this thing, and that brings us to an hourly rate of $177 an hour. And I'll call that a super successful flip. Now, even though I only spent 19 hours getting this Jeep ready for sale, I've spent so far, without exaggeration, over 40 hours of editing for this super long video. I do all my own repairs, filming, and editing all by myself, so if you want to help support the channel, you can press this thanks button here. You can also support me on Patreon and get the ability to ask me any questions you want personally, or you can go to lithiumautocare.com and use promo code BuddiesDIY20 if you want some super high quality detailing products at a discount. Also be sure to check out the other flip videos, subscribe for more flip videos in the future, and press that thumbs up button and leave a comment for the YouTube algorithm. Also guys, if you aren't already, be sure to follow me on Instagram where I post a little bit behind the scenes stuff. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll be back in a little with another awesome flip video.